supported our vendors and have read and rallied around the paper for all these years. So we have one of the bigger organizations as a street paper in North America, joined close behind by the Portland street paper Street Roots and many others, including Denver. So that's been really neat to get to work for this organization that's been doing it for a long time, and work with Tim and our advocacy department and vendor program and development, just doing so many cool programs all under Real Change.
That's fantastic. And what was it that attracted you to Real Change, Lee?
Well, I'd always been one of those fans, one of the readers for many years, as a Seattleite for 10 years now. So I loved Real Change. And it's so popular in Seattle that I heard about it. I felt like soon after moving here, probably also because I was a journalist. So over time, I, of course, always bought the paper, being a big fan, and then started volunteering and was the backup copy editor for a long time. So that was really cool. I would look forward to whenever I'd get called up to come in and copy edit and work in the office, in the newsroom. So that's generally it. And then just being a journalist now for, almost 20 years. And before that, one of those young people who made my own newspapers as a kid. But most of my career, people have been talking about just newsrooms, newspapers, journalism on the decline, and then, really under attack in the Trump era. But then before that, with the internet and newspapers really dwindling and newsrooms dwindling. So I know that it's hard to make a living as a journalist. So it was cool to see the Real Change model in a nonprofit news model.
That's fantastic. Elizabeth, you want to tell us about the Denver Voice?
Sure. I have been with the Denver Voice since July of 2019. And I'm actually a Denver native. There aren't a lot of us here. I think a lot of we're just drawing a lot of people who aren't from Denver. So there are more of them than the natives probably. But I have been doing a mix of communications work since I started my career. So I've been on both sides of the media pitch. I've done a lot of public relations, and I've been a regular contributor to a number of business publications in Denver and in Albuquerque, New Mexico. I lived in New Mexico for about 5 years and was I was at the time the public information officer for the state housing agency. And that was where I was familiar with the Voice, but that was where I really learned in a different community a lot about homelessness. And so when I returned to Denver about 15 years ago, I was mostly working for myself and kind of helping out different boutique agencies, doing some work for some community newspapers on the side. What made me think I should work with the Voice is I was that person that would walk down the 16th Street Mall and see the Denver Voice vendors approach me, and I'd cross the street. That was me. I am not proud of that, but it also made me realize if I'm going to do that, I need to reach out. I need to be able to connect with those people and find out how we can keep them on the street and get the conversation going. The Denver Voice, this is our 25th anniversary this year. And my understanding is we started out as the people who began it, we were just a resource, a list of resources for people experiencing homelessness. And then over time, it's evolved into a paper, and we are so fortunate to be connected with INSP. But the majority of our vendors are over the age of 50. And that has made the past year very different for us. And I think it's really strange to talk about trends pertaining to media when you're looking at street papers and when you're looking at the pandemic. So I kind of feel like we're in a whole new model. And so
we're going to come back to street papers operating in the pandemic and a little bit. Well, first I want to, because I think a lot of people who are going to see this don't know a lot about street papers and sort of the basics of how we operate. Can we just give some numbers for each of your papers? Let's start with you, Elizabeth. Like how many vendors are selling the paper? How many staff does the Denver Voice have? What kind of a budget are you operating on? Let's just sort of start with that. And how often do you publish? How many papers are you selling?
So again, it's changed, but our paper is a monthly publication, and since the pandemic, we have started doing more with our website. Different thing, but it is another vehicle to get information out. We have right now no more than 25 active vendors.
Wow.
I'm not sure what our budget is, and by the way, we, years ago, probably 10 years ago, we had like 200 vendors. It's just this weird fluctuation we're in. There are 3 of us really on staff at Voice. So our executive director, Jen Sabold, our program coordinator, Anthony Cunyejo, and me. And then we've got 2 peer navigators. And one of them is also a vendor, and he's been with us for a really long time. Not sure what our budget is, but we were up to 6,000 papers, not a huge order, but we were really excited because we were starting to order that many a month.
Yeah.
We're kind of around 3,000, and we've dropped the price for our vendors. So they buy the paper from us for 50 cents. Anything they keep, suggested donation is $2. So anything they keep, they over the 50 cents, anything they get, they keep. We've bumped that down to 25 cents because of everything going on. When we hit 3 consecutive months where we're having to order more, we may bump it up again.
Of course you will. Lee, can you give us that same information?
Yeah. So there's 15 people who work for Real Change in the departments, some I mentioned, development, advocacy, the vendor program, operations, and editorial. On the news team, we have 4 people. So it's me, an arts editor, and 2 reporters. And I think our budget is around $800,000, maybe a little more. A lot of staffing costs are in that, and then program costs. And vendors, I think that number has also changed quite a bit in the quarantine, and I think it's just over 100 now. In recent years, I think it's been closer to 250, but in past years, I know, Tim, y'all had more like 400, right?
It was 400 during the kind of high point around 2008, 2009, but been reliably around 300 or so since then. And of course, things dropped dramatically during COVID. Yeah. And I think all street papers have really struggled with that, but things are starting to get kind of back to normal, right?
Yeah.
Slowly.
And then a few more numbers. Yeah, is in Seattle, we're lucky to also have an outpost in Bellingham, which is like a mid-sized city, I think almost 2 hours north of Seattle. And there's 2 or 3 vendors who work regularly up in Bellingham selling the paper, and we just ship the paper up to them. And the paper comes out every Wednesday. We're a weekly, so it comes out every Wednesday morning. A lot of vendors come and are there first thing, lined up outside of the door. And then circulation in recent years has been around 11,000. Okay, and then in the quarantine, we've ordered about 6,500 papers a week, and probably circulation is around 4,000 between Seattle and Bellingham.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for that. I think a lot of the people who are watching this are going to be watching it, or journalists who are curious about street papers. So let's talk about the content of street papers. How are street papers similar or different from more traditional news media? And are homeless people writing the stories that you publish? Because that's what a lot of people think street papers are about.
Mm-hmm.
I'll jump in here. because I think it really depends on the street paper. And, I've talked to some who in the past have had vendors do a lot of writing. Our vendors, we don't have any journalists, and we are a newspaper. We have sections of the paper that I welcome vendor content all the time because they're the ones whose stories we're telling. So it's really great when they can tell it. But there are sections of the paper that are specifically for the vendors. The people who write for us are all journalists, or we have an award-winning photographer we have a couple of them, but we don't have a huge crew. But we follow journalism standards. We're not like some, church bulletin where we talk about Gladys's potato salad. We're talking about real issues. A lot of it is hyperlocal, but because of the universal issue of homelessness, we're all, there's something going on in Seattle, we're likely to share it. Or, sometimes we might get a story translated from Germany that we'll pull off of INSP and publish as well. So yeah, those are the main things I wanted to hit on. I had something else, but it popped out of my mind. So I'm sure Lee has something brilliant that she will add.
Okay, Lee, be brilliant.
Okay, no, you let me form some thoughts. They are all different, but a lot of similarity. Real Change, I think most traditionally I would describe as a general interest weekly newspaper, where we're doing a lot of hard news stories about city politics around Seattle, which always keeps us busy. We often write about homelessness issues. We don't want a big development around homelessness advocacy or oppression to get past us. We try to at least always write a news brief from week to week to keep people updated on those issues. And then we often do write longer news stories about homelessness issues, and then feature stories, especially features, as Elizabeth alluded to, that tell a vendor story or several aspects of, maybe a way to group together vendors. Like we're doing a feature right now about vendors and vaccines, who's gotten vaccinated and how, and who hasn't. But as far as vendors writing for the paper, I think like Elizabeth said, that would be the ideal, to get as much vendor representation and voice in the paper as possible. I think we achieve that more as far as telling stories relevant to marginalized people, especially anti-poverty news stories. And then we just jump at the chance if a vendor expresses any interest in wanting to write or be interviewed or contribute something more creative, like an illustration. And then we always start those conversations with vendors with what's your level of interest or involvement that you want? Like, what's ideal? Do you want to write this and then I'll just take a look at it? Or do you want me to ghostwrite it and then put your name on it? So we just always try to keep that door open, because we're very aware that our vendors are why we're here. They're what we're offering that's most unique about a street paper. And we want to supply an excellent product, which, like Elizabeth said, is largely produced by professional and very experienced journalists. And so, yeah, I think people pick it up and it probably reads like an alternative weekly, and we're glad for that. And then a few differences, though, is we get to just be honest in the fact that we're creating advocacy journalism. So there's a special bent to that I'm sure we'll talk about more. And then another special piece, like Elizabeth also mentioned, is the INSP, the International Network of Street Papers Newswire. So we get to use the content from the Newswire produced by all the other street papers in the world, which adds an amazing take that you're then getting to hear about these issues in other key cities around the US and translated from around the world.
One thing I did want to interject, and you reminded me, Lee, we have special issues that we do, and those are written by the vendors. We were getting ready to put one together, and then when the pandemic hit, it's just trying to get as we're all coming back, I've been talking to vendors because there are some really powerful stories that I want them to share. And it's exactly what you said, Lee. I've spoken to them. It's like I can interview and write it I can, work with you if you want to write it. I don't want to step on them. I don't want to strip their voices, but there are also times when if it's grammar that, I give them the option, because if they're adamant about keeping it real, that's fine. I will honor that. But 9 times out of 10, they know that I'm the editor. And so they know I may know something, and I run it by them. If they like it, great. If not, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's always a challenge at a street paper is, maintaining that voice and at the same time editing for quality. My experience is that, pretty much everybody's happy when you help people to sound better. Let's talk about advocacy. Lee brought up the advocacy journalism issue. Most street papers, especially here in North America, prioritize engaging the vendors in organizing and advocacy. Can you tell me what that looks like in your paper? And, back to this issue of advocacy journalism, street papers having journalistic ethics, even though they are non-traditional papers. How do you keep the lines between the advocacy and the journalism clean?
Mm-hmm.
You want to jump in on that, Lee?
Yeah, we have that conversation so often, which is why I'm smiling and nodding. And I was just talking to our new features reporter about this because she's so energized by what our advocacy department is doing. And so her story ideas already are really informed by what they're working on. And so she asked me, is that okay? Because she's heard us also talk about a firewall with our advocacy and development departments. So that was cool to have that conversation with her. Again, that we'll probably end up having at least weekly. And I told her that just to always have the news lens as well. Like, we're looking for what's newsworthy. And if it happens to be what our advocacy department's doing, that's great. And so our firewall with our coworkers and departments is more, it's more specific that we don't want to become the advocacy department's newspaper, like not a newsletter. We are a newspaper. And so that's a journalistic ethic that we hold, that we want to have the autonomy and the firewalls that any newsroom would have. And we just have that special firewall because we also have an internal advocacy department that we happen to agree with probably often and are covering the same stories. But it's easier, I think, for journalists to understand a firewall with the advertising or the money department of a news organization. So I try to lean on those examples. Like, would we want to just, how would we interact with our advertisers or sponsors, our financiers? And then we try to hold a similar line with advocacy, just to ask what's driving the story. How am I being influenced, or is this truly news that I think is important to the audience? But with that said, it is cool that we're doing advocacy journalism because we get to, I think, be straightforward and transparent, that we are, of a certain politic, but not be political, but be, advocates.
So advocacy journalism means different things to different people. What's the working definition at Real Change?
It's that's a great, I don't have like a pat definition. I wish I did, and want to work on that now. But I think I'm better at giving examples that, for instance, we, think really hard and have these conversations all the time about how to refer to unsheltered people. And so we get to use terms like unsheltered, unhoused, people experiencing homelessness. But, like I've heard you both say too, we do use the word homelessness or homeless, especially when we're talking about the advocacy issues, because we know that there's a homelessness crisis. And so we don't try to, worry about telling another side or another perspective on that story. Like, we're all very in sync about, working against poverty and racism and homelessness. And so thinking of a working definition on the spot, I would say that we get to be social justice oriented in our reporting.
Yeah, that's good. How about you, Elizabeth?
So we Lee, you just said so many. You're so very articulate. We, we are. I'm sorry, my dog is playing with his toy in the background, and we're just going to let that be background noise. For some examples of our advocacy, just to kind of give you an idea of where we are. You know, unfortunately, Colorado has had way too many stories of mass shootings, including the most recent one in Boulder. And during the summer, when there were the protests, you know, against the murder of George Floyd, there were the vigils for Elijah Cummings and Elijah McClain, I mean, sorry. And one of our writer photographers was attending a number of those events, and he was able to capture some photos and interview a guy who, when they attempted a violin vigil, there was a showdown with the police, and this gentleman just started playing his violin, and it kind of calmed that part of the park where they were gathered. And so Giles wrote this lovely story, and we posted that and the photos on our website because we weren't printing the paper during then. But it resonated with people because it was a different part of the story of what's going on and what people are trying to do to come together about it. We like to talk to people in the community who represent the marginalized communities. And we have street sweeping here. I mean, sweeps like rather homeless camp sweeps. And during the pandemic, you know, the CDC said, leave the camps alone. And our mayor didn't. And so we're always talking about that. You know, how do we support, how do we make people aware, but also what can we do for our vendors who are being affected by the sweeps? So we do a lot of, if there's somebody in the community who's got a story to tell, who is doing something amazing, we will cover that too.
That's great. As a lot of people over, really the last couple of decades have moved towards getting their news online, how has that affected street papers? Because, you know, street papers have to have the paper product for vendors to be able to sell on the street. There's this, you know, balance of the necessity of having a paper for the vendors and for them to sell directly and reaching your readers and supporters online. Can you talk about that balance and how that some of the dilemmas that you've been dealing with around that?
I don't know if any of you were familiar with examiner.com, but it was kind of an online hyperlocal news platform. Mm-hmm. And I actually worked with them for a while. And I remember the Rocky Mountain News had just gone away and the Denver Post was being decimated. And so that's been one of the things I've loved about the Voice is we're a print publication.
Yeah.
We didn't really do much with our website until last May. It was, you know, it was just like our events and about us and our mission statement and all that. We have now opened a section of our paper of our website that is news that isn't, since we're monthly, it's not like, it's something maybe that's going on with city council. It might be a tiny home village for women that has just opened and it's an update about, you know, sure, that. So we have started working with the website to have more kind of time sensitive or not as, you know, not as visually compelling stories, because so much of our stories are the photos of the people and what they're working on or what they're experiencing. So it's been interesting to see that the website is a really vital tool, but the paper, as you said, Tim, the paper is that product, and it is that way for them to have the connection with the buyers, with the readers. And, you know, we've talked about, I think other street papers may have different products that they also sell.
Right.
For December, every issue, we have a wrapping paper issue, and the wrapping paper, they're designed by our vendors.
Yeah.
And so our graphic designer takes them and turns them into these, like, she just fine tunes the illustrations and turns them into these terrific files. And then they're part of the paper. So it's not like the paper is the price is still the same, but it's just a really cool thing. And it's a way to get our vendors, you know, they want to get out there with, they sell so many of them. People are really excited about that. You can't translate that online, but at the same time, we can't go out and be selling, you know, iPhone cases. That's,
Sure.
you know, so it really is, when we had to stop printing for a while, we realized we had to change our model for a little while, because we had to come up with a way to keep our vendors taken care, you know, vendors getting their, having some sort of income, having some sort of funds to keep them going during the downtimes. Sure. And so that was a really interesting experience. And I think that we have, I just think it's made us, it's just sharpened our program for the voice, our vendor program.
Let's move to Lee on this question. Lee, what's the online side of Real Change look like, and how do you prioritize reaching people through social media and that sort of thing, and projecting Real Change as a newspaper online?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating relationship to digital content in our newspaper. Being someone who's passionate about anti-oppression and journalism, it's cool to finally be at a place where the main driver is supporting our vendors, either through this product or some other products we sell, like apparel. And those are kind of like treat products that our vendors sell only sometimes, but it's really about this newspaper, and it's really doubling down even more, I think, than other journalistic organizations, that we are committed to this being a tangible product as a street paper. And so I know that it was a really tough decision to put Real Change content online, and all of our content is on our website, and it's really good looking. We just finished a big redesign on it. So it looks like, you know, pretty standard news site. And I've only been at Real Change since September of 2019, but I've gotten to get the backstory from Tim or others about how did you decide to put the content online? Because I'm sure there was the worry that that would compete with that product for vendors, that you can get our content on the website. So Tim told me that y'all did deliberate that decision, and then at one point put the content on the website a day later, so that vendors and customers could know that this is a special product and that you're only getting these news stories on Wednesday directly from a vendor. Now we actually do upload the content the same day the newspaper comes out, because Tim and others watched the numbers closely and found that vendor sales didn't decrease with the content online. So then we got to go full steam ahead and just think that we're offering our content in these two different realms, and that they're not taking away from each other. And then our hope with social media and that web presence is that that's just increasing the Real Change brand. So that further entrenches us as like a journalistic outlet in Seattle. And then of course there's more leverage with that, with news stories online, that people can then share the stories, and then we can get conversations going on social media. We have a really great social media team of 2 people who work really hard and have like a really well planned out specific calendar about like when they're gonna present advocacy initiatives during the week, and then when they're gonna, you know, post each news story that came out that week, and then get conversations going. So they really just support each other. But again, it's cool to be a journalist in this day and age that is really getting behind a print paper for totally different reasons, you know. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that reason for the print paper, the community impact of street papers, and what it means to the vendors. My experience in the long time that I've been involved with street papers is that the Well, the money that vendors earn is very important to them, obviously. The most transformative part of our work is about the relationships that get created between the readers and the vendors, and how humanizing that is for the vendors, and how that is transformative for both the vendors and the readers. Can you talk about that and maybe share a story about how a vendor has been impacted by those relationships?
Mhm.
I think there are a number of different stories, and sometimes it's just like somebody had an experience during the day where instead of the $2 suggested donation, they were given $100 bill.
Yeah.
And they don't, or even $10. They don't take, it just changes their day. It makes them, they're just radiant when that happens, because they just feel like somebody saw them and valued them. And so those are the kind of like the daily things that can happen with our vendors. As far as, because I was newer, I hadn't been with the boys for maybe I'd been with maybe 6 months. And then with the pandemic, I don't have as many individual stories, but I can tell you we've got a vendor who has started his own landscaping company and is doing really well. He still vends. He's also working for Amazon. And we've got folks who, it's like, well, we haven't seen that person in a while. And somebody said, oh, that's because he got a job somewhere else. We are a low barrier employer. So people can come to us. We don't do background checks. They don't need to have an ID. They can have some sort of criminal record, and we're not going to throw them out and tell them they're, not welcome. So those people come in, and when we hear that any of our vendors is not going to be vending because they've gotten a full-time job or something, or they're in housing and they're good to go, that is a great story.
Yeah.
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 Mhm.
Lee, you want to talk about the relationship side?
Yeah, so many stories are coming to mind. Firstly, before I got to work here, I thought I had a special relationship with my vendor, Don. And I just thought, like, me and that guy really have a lot to talk about, and I really enjoy seeing him. And then what was amazing getting to know vendors more on a daily basis is they have dozens of people who probably think that they have a special relationship, and they do with this vendor. And vendors really have a community surrounding them and surrounding their post or posts, some, posts up at different places. And it's really true that they're kind of like this roving community hub.
Right.
And it always made me feel special that I had that, because living in a big city, especially as a newcomer, it was like, it really meant a lot to me when I would see Don. It was like a friendly face and an anchor for me at the big grocery store in Seattle. And so it even personalized that experience for me. But beyond a personal story, Elizabeth reminded me of my favorite vendor story I've heard lately. A vendor of ours named Sean, who's always been really successful as a vendor. He's really, charming and can be really extroverted, and also really thoughtful, and listens well to customers who stop and talk to him. He was telling me recently that he'd had a tough year even before COVID started last year. And then sales really dipped, everywhere. And for Sean, he kept going to the post and just kept at it, and then had an idea as the weather heated up here, where he hand wrote notes, he said, for 10 customers. He made himself do it 10 times. And so he put 10 notes on customers' cars who he knew would recognize his name when he signed the note. And they said, do you have any work I can do in your yard? And he just wrote them each, these handwritten notes, which I'm sure was really kind to receive, because he told me that all 10 people took him up on the offer and hired him throughout the summer. And he said he just loved it. And he said that, that's his dream job now, is getting to do that and work outside. So he's going to do it again this summer. And like Sean and so many vendors, if they end up finding different work, I'm surprised so many of them still sell the paper. They'll do it like one day a week or maybe a few days a week. And it's that really keeps me going to think that, you know, people really enjoy doing this, and it's not, you know, just a job. You know, you know, in some ways every job is, you know, about the money, and people are doing it because it's really become, you know, a support system for them in more ways than that.
Um, I just, you know, Lee, you use the term roving community hub, which I love because it is. It's we have a vendor who's been with us for a really long time, Brian Augustine, and I didn't see him. You know, he came. We had a one of the TV stations did a story on us, so he had come for that. But Brian had COVID twice, and so he didn't come around. He showed back up last week, and it was just so great to see him. And he talked about just the isolation, the extreme isolation he felt because he knew he wasn't feeling well and he had the disease, but he didn't want to expose anybody to COVID, but at the same time he also wanted to make sure he wasn't, you know, getting it a third time. And just to see those folks show back up in the office, it's just, it's heartwarming. It's like, you know, the kids are coming back home for the summer or something. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's stick with this theme of the last year and COVID for a minute. COVID's been really rough on everybody for the last year, particularly street papers, because the nature of street papers is so directly face to face, and that has been hard for all of us. Most street papers around the world had to shut down for a little while and then come back in more limited ways. Can you talk about how each of your papers have supported the vendors through this crisis, and some of the ways that it's changed the organization, maybe even for the better?
You want to go, Lee?
Yeah, lots is coming to mind. I think Seattle got a head start in COVID. And so our awesome development director started the vendor relief fund. And I know several other street papers followed that model after she did it. And that was really successful here. I think we raised $100,000 throughout a long period of time, but at different junctures with that fundraising, our development director, Camilla, with our directors, Tim and Shelley, would then pay vendors because they weren't selling the paper, and off even when they were, because we went in and out of printing throughout the first year of COVID. So Real Change gave gift cards to vendors, and there were, you know, intricate plans around that. Some vendors would opt to sell the paper and be paid, you know, this income from the vendor relief fund, or some, you know, there were just, it was really vendor specific too, which is what I thought was really cool about it, just given each vendor's circumstance. But we did rounds of gift cards where vendors were paid that way. So that was really amazing to see that we're not, you know, going through the motions here at all as far as supporting vendors and understanding that this is a lot of people's sole income and you know, a full-time job and a job just like any other. And so as you know, we saw so many systems shift around paying people, you know, through unemployment or you know, through different ways that so many of our jobs changed or halted during this time. It was really cool to see you know, my coworkers really back that up, that this, you know, we're employment to people.
You had
So
the
what does that
case
look like? So it was
manager.
cool.
You had the case manager helping people get their stimulus checks. You all
Yeah.
opened the food bank, which was something really new and different for Real Change, and we're even delivering packages of groceries to the homebound vendors who were afraid to go out during COVID.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Tim. Yeah, so a lot of that, we want to keep, and so we're getting to start talking about how we keep that, including, selling other products or finding other ways that vendors can make money through real change, because, a street paper is always a tough sell. And we got to see, how tough that is then when people are just repelled by each other, and especially, someone who people are really prone to look away from and not want to have an interaction with. So street papers, I agree, Tim, took an especially hard hit in COVID. Yeah.
And Adam just reminded me that we did the hand sanitizer project as well, which was a great product for our vendors to be selling.
Yeah.
Elizabeth, what did it look like in Denver?
I'm so glad Lee went first on that one, because Seattle did, they kind of set the bar for the rest of us. They, you guys were such a terrific example, and really just were reassuring to know that we weren't just going to crumble. But because this was happening, Jen, our executive director, had spoken with folks at your paper. She'd spoken with INSP, and it was like, okay, it looks like things are shutting down. Get a relief fund going now. And she jumped on the phone and she got I'm not really sure the number, but it was substantial. And so we were able to do, people had to, it kind of depended on their involvement with the voice, whatever their situations were, what they needed. Some people just needed grocery cards. Some folks needed, we had a guy whose wife had a baby and he needed diapers. We gave out a number of phones, but we also partnered with a local organization that helped pay our vendors a certain amount a day, like $25 a day, to go out and meet with others in the community who were not, maybe they were sleeping in camps, but maybe they weren't, some were just like in the park, and they were going and handing out sanitizer, hand sanitizer, talking to them about some masks, talking to them about what was going on with the pandemic. We also did a partnership with that same organization where folks were paid to help with the census. But yeah, it was really, it was scary to know that these folks who relied on the paper suddenly did not have that product, and they didn't have that connection with us. And even since, with more of us getting vaccinated, I'm not as crazy about it, but when I don't care where I am, when there are a lot of people in a room, I start getting kind of nervous. Sure. And I mean, that was pre-pandemic. So, but with more of us, we're starting to see more of our vendors coming back. And I can't wait till we can have like a potluck again, or a buffet where we get to have them sit around and tell their stories and talk to us and each other.
Wasn't it the Denver Voice? I'm recalling something about the Denver Voice working with some collaboration with a foundation to help vendors who are at risk of losing their housing with their rent. Am I making that up? Did that happen?
I'm not sure. I know that we were helping with, we don't have case managers, but our peer navigators, which just was a brand new program last year, they have been working one-on-one with the folks who are participating in the program, because not everybody wants a peer navigator. Sure. They've been working with them on, filling out the forms for Section 8 housing, making sure that they get everything in before the drawing. And we have one of our vendors today came in who's just recently gotten Section 8 housing, and it was really great to see him. But I'm not sure because the relief fund, a lot of that did come from some of the foundations. So I'm not sure, Tim, you may know more than I do. And if Jen is watching, I am so sorry. I don't have that info, but I'll make good on that.
It's fine. It's fine. A couple of questions have come in while we've been talking, and there's two of them that are asking about volunteering for the
Oh,
paper,
good.
particularly in terms of journalists and photographers. Are there openings for people to volunteer or even get freelance work helping with your street papers?
Mhm.
You know, Tim and I, you and I talked earlier this week and talked about that. And I don't hire folks, I don't have freelancers who aren't in Denver or aren't in Colorado, unless it's like we've worked with Adam on stories because he's been involved with street papers. He's been an editor. If it's somebody who's in the community and writing about the issues, but if it's somebody like, hey, I'm in, this state and I want to, we need the local perspective, unless it's a bigger, something that we're participating in. But yeah, there are always opportunities, and we pay our journalists and our photographers not a lot of money, but they do get paid. They're not volunteers. We do have all sorts of needs for folks showing up in our office and helping out, with some of the administrative or just talking with vendors who might need something and our program person is preoccupied. But yeah, well, that's one thing that I don't think journalists realize is, there are these street papers around the world that have opportunities. And yeah, I'm always looking for good journalists who want to talk about the issues and have ideas, or maybe they don't, maybe they want to be assigned something, but yep, there are opportunities. Hit me up.
How about you, Lee?
Yeah, I think that, like I mentioned before, one cool resource that we all have as street paper editors is the Street Paper Wire, which connects us all in a lot of ways, and notably here
And what's the name of that
as
organization that
content
does the
providers.
Street Paper
So I
Wire?
think the
What's the name of that organization?
I,
Street Paper.
yeah,
INSP.
we're not saying it. We keep almost saying it. The International Network of Street Papers, and the acronym we're saying is INSP.
Uh-huh.
So with that said, some of the bigger or more frequently published street papers, including Real Change, are a good entry point to write for a street paper, and then other papers will pick it up on the wire. So because we're weekly, we're 12 pages and we have a lot of pages to fill. And so we work a lot with volunteer contributors, some paid contributors, mostly out of what we have at Real Change called the Equity Fund, which our great development coworkers also work on with us. And so that pays journalists of color to contribute to the paper, because we recognize that we don't have nearly enough staff members of color at Real Change. So we have the Equity Fund, out of which we can pay freelancers. But again, we work with freelancers all the time. And so that's writing everything from opinion pieces, columns, hard news stories, features, and then a lot of volunteer photographers who are just really talented photojournalists and live in the area. Some are retired. So among our volunteer base, we have people who have volunteered for Real Change for all 26 years, contributing to the paper. Some people contribute as volunteer columnists every week. So that's been huge at Real Change, and to get to be an editor of a newspaper where people really want to volunteer and contribute, and then get to share it on a newswire just freely, where there's there's no competition and there's no bureaucracy in that, that then that piece of journalism can be published around the world, especially with those like-minded issues. So it's either kind of the common denominator of some of the social justice issues we mentioned, or local stuff to Seattle. So again, I know we appreciate a lot of outside contribution, and so does Street Roots. They run more on freelance writers, actually. So those are great places to start if people are interested.
We are going to be out of time pretty soon. I have a question here about how many street papers exist in the United States and around the world and what the INSP is. So I'm just going to briefly answer those. The current count of street papers around the world is about 100 street papers across 35 countries, publishing in 25 languages, that are members of the International Network of Street Papers. And there are other street papers that, a handful of other street papers that are not in the network, but most street papers are. The International Network of Street Papers, as you've mentioned, offers the news service where street papers around the world are able to share content. There's a resources hub so that street papers who are struggling with various issues don't need to reinvent the wheel. They can work with each other on creating vendor databases, personnel manuals, policies and procedures around editorial content, stuff like that. So information gets shared there. And until COVID, there was an international conference that was hosted each year by a different street paper. Last year, the conference was supposed to be in Milan. We're going to try and, actually, we're not going to try and do it this year. So that's been hard for everybody because the street paper movement are a bunch of kindred spirits who love each other, and we all miss seeing each other. And there, of course, is the International Network of Street Papers North America, which is a subset of the INSP that organizes street papers and supports street papers in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So there's that. Do either of you want to add anything about how the International Network of Street Papers has supported your work, your street papers?
Yeah, so just recently we did a project with INSP where they did a housing playbook, fair housing playbook. And so INSP found experts who were talking about what was going on with housing, and Julian Castro was involved with this housing playbook, and it was a series of 4 articles, and one was actually translated from Spanish to English. So we ran the Spanish first, and we ran them online. But that's something that they're working on. INSP of North America is working on different programs with different street papers, just to give each one a little bit of their name and lights, but we're all working together and the content is available to everyone. So it's like, this time it might have been Denver, next time it might be Seattle. It's just they're always around, they're always available, and the support we've gotten has been terrific.
Thank you for that. We are basically out of time. I want to thank again the New England Newspaper and Press Association for hosting this panel and helping to pull it together. And again, thank you so much to Lee Nicosi over at Real Change and Elizabeth Monahan at the Denver Voice. Thank you so much for participating in this, and thank you for everybody that was here listening.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
All righty, take care.